History will not record most names, not because they lack talent, not because they lack time, but because they never chose a direction. And if that unsettles you, it should. Because the quiet erosion of an unlived life does not announce itself. It simply continues. There is a reason so many people feel tired without being fulfilled. It is not overwork. It is not bad luck. It is something far more uncomfortable. You are exerting effort without conscious command. You rise, you respond, you react, you move, but you do not decide. And there is a difference so subtle that most never detect it. The world praises motion, it rewards busyness, it applauds sacrifice, but it does not ask whether your motion is self-directed or inherited. Most lives drift not because of weakness, but because drifting feels responsible. You follow expectations, you answer demands, you fulfill roles, you pursue what seems reasonable, and slowly, without confrontation, the days accumulate into a direction you never consciously chose. There is a reason this feels normal, and that reason is dangerous. From childhood, you are trained to respond to structure, school bells, deadlines, authority, evaluation. You are rarely trained to decide. Not casually, not emotionally, but with finality. Definiteness of purpose is not a poetic phrase. It is a psychological command center. Without it, your mind does not stop functioning. It simply begins accepting instruction from outside forces, and outside forces are relentless. Family expectations, economic fear, cultural comparison, the silent competition of peers. These do not ask for your permission. They occupy empty space. If you do not define your direction, something else will. This is not metaphor. It is law. Consider this carefully. Have you chosen your present path because it reflects your deliberate aim or because it reduced immediate discomfort? Most people confuse relief with purpose. They avoid criticism. They avoid risk. They avoid instability. And in doing so, they believe they are being wise. But what they are actually doing is negotiating with fear. Fear of poverty. Fear of failure. Fear of judgment. These fears rarely scream. They whisper practical advice. Be realistic. Don't aim too high. Security first. And so you comply, not because you are incapable, but because you were never taught to confront fear as an internal force. You were taught to manage circumstances, not to command thought. There is a profound distinction between drifting and deciding. Drifting requires no self-examination. It requires no declaration. It demands no courage. It is passive surrender, disguised as maturity. Non-drifting, conscious direction requires something else entirely. It requires you to answer a question most avoid. What do you want so clearly that you are willing to reorganize your identity around it? Notice the weight of that. Reorganize your identity, because direction is not a hobby. It is not a side ambition. It is a ruling intention. Without a ruling intention, your habits become your master, and habits are formed by repetition, not reflection. This is why effort alone does not produce advancement. You can work tirelessly and still be moving in circles. You can sacrifice sleep and still remain spiritually stagnant. Motion is not progress. Progress is measured against a definite end. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. If nothing changed in the next 10 years, not your effort, not your routine, would you be proud of the outcome, or would you rationalize it? Rationalization is the final defense of the drifting mind. It says, this is fine. It could be worse. At least I tried. But trying without direction is self-soothing. Andrew Carnegie did not accumulate power because he worked harder than every laborer in his mills. He commanded a definite aim and aligned every decision beneath it. Henry Ford did not stumble into transformation. He obsessed over a singular vision and bent his thinking around it. Definiteness compresses time. Indecision dissolves it. Most lives end without conscious direction because decision feels dangerous. To decide means to close doors. To decide means to risk visible failure. To decide means to confront your own procrastination. And procrastination is not laziness. It is identity protection. If you never fully commit, you never fully risk exposure. You can always say you could have. That illusion protects the ego, but it quietly erodes the future. There is a truth here that many resist. You do not lack ability. You lack finality. Finality terrifies the drifting mind, because once you decide, you cannot pretend ignorance. You must act in alignment, and alignment reveals discipline or its absence. Most people fear discipline not because it is hard, but because it removes excuses. Without conscious direction, you remain safely average. You can blame conditions. You can blame economy. You can blame opportunity. But once you declare purpose, blame becomes irrelevant, and that is uncomfortable. There is a hidden cost to remaining undefined. It does not announce itself as tragedy. It feels like slow compromise. You adjust your expectations downward. You justify smaller aims. You silence ambition with practicality. And years pass. Not dramatically, quietly. The tragedy of an undirected life is not collapse. It is quiet conformity. You sense something larger within you. You sense unused capacity. You feel it when you observe extraordinary achievement. But sensing is not choosing, and choice is the dividing line between those who drift and those who command. There is a reason so few choose, because once you accept that direction is your responsibility, something else must be confronted. And that confrontation is not external, it is internal. It is the recognition that the enemy was never circumstance, it was never opportunity, it was something far closer, something that has been operating unnoticed. And until you see it clearly, you will continue to move without arriving. You have been told that effort is the answer. Work harder, stay consistent, be patient. And yet you have seen people who work relentlessly and never advance beyond a certain ceiling. Why? Because effort, when commanded by fear, strengthens the very prison it hopes to escape. This is the truth most never confront. The enemy is not laziness, it is unconscious obedience. There is a mechanism inside you that accepts dominant emotion as instruction. Whatever emotion repeats itself most frequently becomes authority. And for most people, that authority is fear. Subtle, rationalized, disguised. Fear does not always paralyze. Sometimes it motivates, but it motivates defensively. You pursue income because you fear poverty. You pursue approval because you fear criticism. You pursue stability because you fear uncertainty. And when fear is the root, your actions are protective, not expansive. Protective action keeps you alive. It does not make you powerful. There is a reason this pattern feels responsible, and that reason is dangerous. Society rewards safety. It praises predictability. It calls compromise maturity. But safety cannot generate greatness. It can only maintain survival. You may be surviving exceptionally well, but are you directing? Most people never meet the real enemy because it never announces itself. It blends into common sense. It sounds like, now is not the right time. Let me prepare a little more. I will commit once I feel confident. Confidence does not precede decision. Decision precedes confidence. This is where drifting disguises itself as prudence. You delay the defining move. You hesitate before the declaration. You soften your ambition to make it socially acceptable. And every time you do, you reinforce a habit. Drifting is not random. It is trained. The mind operates through repetition. Whatever you repeatedly tolerate becomes standard. Whatever you repeatedly avoid becomes feared. If you repeatedly postpone decisive action, your identity adjusts to accommodate postponement. You begin to see yourself as someone considering, not someone commanding. There is a psychological law at work here. Thoughts mixed with emotion become belief. Belief repeated becomes identity. Identity directs behavior automatically. This is autosuggestion in its most dangerous form, not the deliberate kind, the unconscious kind. You are suggesting to yourself every day who you are. When you shrink from criticism, you tell yourself you are fragile. When you avoid risk, you tell yourself you are limited. When you delay commitment, you tell yourself you are uncertain, and your mind obeys. It does not debate. It accepts dominant instruction. This is why effort fails, because effort without belief alignment creates internal conflict. You say you want expansion, but you emotionally rehearse failure. You say you desire independence, but you repeatedly choose approval. You claim you want control, but you surrender decisions to comfort. The mind cannot serve two masters. Fear and faith cannot command simultaneously. One will dominate, and most people never consciously choose which one rules. They drift into fear dominance because fear feels urgent. Faith feels abstract. Fear shouts immediate consequences. Faith whispers long-term inevitability, and so you respond to the louder voice. Understand something critical. Fear is not eliminated by information. It is replaced by decision. You cannot reason yourself out of fear while remaining undecided, because indecision feeds it. Indecision says, "I am not sure I can." Fear answers, "Then don't." You see the cycle. The more you hesitate, the more credible fear becomes. The more credible fear becomes, the more you hesitate. And eventually, hesitation feels like personality. You begin describing yourself in limiting terms. I am cautious. I like security. I do not take big risks. But caution without purpose is containment. Security without direction is stagnation. Risk avoidance becomes identity protection. This is why procrastination is not a time management issue. It is self-image preservation. If you never fully step forward, you never fully expose yourself to judgment. If you never define a bold purpose, you never risk visible failure, and so you remain in preparation mode. Preparation feels productive, but endless preparation is a sophisticated form of fear. Thomas Edison did not wait for perfect certainty. He accepted visible failure as part of the path because his purpose overpowered embarrassment. Abraham Lincoln endured repeated defeat, not because he enjoyed adversity, but because his direction was greater than his fear of criticism. Their courage was not absence of fear, it was dominance of purpose. Purpose creates gravity. Without it, fear dictates orbit. You may believe you are independent, but examine your daily decisions. How many are designed to avoid discomfort? How many are aligned with a declared, written, emotionally charged aim? There is a reason this question unsettles you, because if the majority of your choices are avoidance-based, then your life trajectory is fear-shaped, and fear-shaped lives remain small, not because of limitation, but because of internal permission. You grant yourself only what feels safe, but safety is a ceiling. There is one more element most ignore: environment. The people you surround yourself with reinforce either drifting or direction. If you share your ambitions with those who operate from fear, they will project their limitations onto you, not maliciously, protectively. They will advise moderation. They will recommend caution. They will highlight risk. And slowly, your vision shrinks to maintain belonging. This is why the mastermind principle exists. Association shapes belief. Belief shapes action. Action shapes destiny. If you remain in environments that normalize drift, you will unconsciously conform. It takes discipline to separate. It takes clarity to withstand doubt. It takes decision to resist the gravitational pull of average expectation. Most people never realize they are not fighting circumstance. They are fighting their own unexamined allegiance to fear. And until that allegiance is broken, effort will exhaust you. You will feel busy. You will feel responsible. You will feel tired. But you will not feel directed. There is a moment, rare, uncomfortable, irreversible, when a person sees this clearly, when they recognize that the barrier was internal command structure, that their thoughts were not aligned, that their emotions were dictating direction, and in that moment something collapses, because once you see the mechanism, you can no longer blame the machine, but seeing it is not enough. There is a breaking point required, and most resist it, because breaking requires surrendering the old identity, the cautious one, the reasonable one, the almost ready one, and that surrender feels like death to the drifting mind. Yet without it, nothing changes. The next truth will not comfort you. It will remove your final excuse. There comes a moment when you can no longer pretend you do not see it. A quiet recognition, not dramatic, not public, not announced, just you, and the awareness that your life is being shaped by forces you never consciously approved. This is the break point. It is not when circumstances collapse. It is when illusion collapses. You suddenly understand that waiting has been a decision, that hesitation has been a direction, that neutrality has been allegiance to fear. And once this becomes clear, something uncomfortable happens. External blame dissolves. You can no longer accuse the economy. You can no longer resent opportunity. You can no longer point at timing, because you see the pattern. Others faced uncertainty. Others faced criticism. Others faced scarcity. Yet some advanced. Why? Not because they were chosen, Because they chose. That is the dividing line most avoid. Choice without guarantee. Most people want assurance before commitment, but assurance is the reward of decision, not its prerequisite. This is where resistance intensifies. Your mind will search desperately for softer interpretations. It's complicated. I need more clarity. I should analyze further. Analysis becomes a shield. But there is a reason analysis feels productive while nothing changes, and that reason is identity preservation. As long as you remain in contemplation, you protect your current self-image. You are still capable, still considering, still potential, but potential unclaimed becomes silent regret. There is a point where the tension between what you sense you could become and what you are tolerating becomes unbearable. Some suppress that tension. They distract themselves. They numb it with entertainment, routine, minor upgrades. Others face it, and facing it requires one brutal admission. No one is coming to define your direction for you. No mentor will force you. No opportunity will rescue you. No perfect moment will announce itself. Andrew Carnegie did not wait for perfect conditions to declare his aim. Henry Ford did not ask for consensus before reorganizing his thinking around production. They reached a private conclusion, a final internal verdict. I will. That statement changes psychological structure. I will eliminates negotiation. Until that phrase is emotionally anchored, you remain divided. And division creates weakness. Part of you desires expansion. Part of you clings to safety. Part of you wants recognition. Part of you fears exposure. When these forces coexist without hierarchy, you experience stagnation. You feel torn. You feel inconsistent. You feel frustrated. But once hierarchy is established, once purpose becomes dominant, the internal argument quiets. This is not motivation. It is alignment. Alignment removes friction. You stop debating yourself. You stop rehearsing excuses. You stop entertaining retreat as an option. But this requires a sacrifice most never make. You must release the comfort of indefinite possibility. You must risk being seen attempting something definitive. You must accept temporary incompetence. You must endure visible missteps. Why is this so difficult? Because the fear of criticism is deeply rooted. Criticism threatens belonging. Belonging once meant survival. Your nervous system still reacts as if social disapproval equals danger, so you shrink ambition to maintain acceptance. You dilute boldness to avoid scrutiny, and then you wonder why life feels constrained. You cannot demand expansion while prioritizing comfort. One must outrank the other. This is the break point. You realize that drifting is not accidental. It is chosen through inaction. You realize that fear has been consulted more often than faith. You realize that your daily habits reflect your dominant belief, not your declared desire. And here is the harsh truth. Your results are not a mystery. They are evidence. Evidence of what you have repeatedly believed about yourself. If you believed you were capable of commanding greater responsibility, you would have accepted it. If you believed you were worthy of greater reward, you would have pursued it with finality. Belief precedes action. Action reveals belief. You cannot hide from this equation. This realization strips away fantasy. It removes romantic excuses. It leaves you alone with responsibility. And responsibility feels heavy at first, because it removes the illusion of limitation imposed by others. But beneath that weight is something else. Power. Not loud power, not arrogant power, quiet authority. The authority of knowing that direction is self-assigned. When you accept that your current position is the outcome of accumulated decisions, conscious or unconscious, you also accept that future position can be altered by new decisions. This is where many retreat, because decision requires commitment. Commitment requires discipline. Discipline requires daily confrontation with your weaker impulses, and most people prefer occasional inspiration to daily discipline. Inspiration feels exhilarating. Discipline feels relentless. Yet only one produces transformation. There is a moment when resistance collapses, not because fear disappears, but because remaining unchanged becomes more painful than risk. You begin to fear mediocrity more than failure. You begin to fear regret more than criticism. You begin to fear wasted potential more than temporary embarrassment. When that inversion occurs, drifting loses its appeal. You no longer ask, "What if I fail?" You begin asking, "What if I never try fully?" That question is dangerous because it exposes the cost of hesitation. Time, irreplaceable time. You start to see that years can pass in comfort and still leave you empty. You start to sense that your dissatisfaction action is not circumstantial, it is directional. And once you accept that, you face the final confrontation. If you are responsible for direction, then you must define it. Not vaguely, not casually, but with precision. And precision demands clarity. What do you want? What are you willing to endure for it? What identity must you abandon to achieve it? Until those answers are written, repeated, emotionally internalized, you remain vulnerable to drift. The break point is not emotional, it is decisive. It is the moment you stop negotiating with fear and start instructing your mind. And that shift, once made, begins to alter everything. But there is a replacement required, because removing fear dominance creates a vacuum, and vacuums do not remain empty. If you do not consciously install a new ruling force, the old one will return. When fear loses dominance, there is a silence, a strange internal quiet. For years, your decisions were filtered through avoidance. What will this cost me? What will they think? What if it fails? When those questions no longer command automatic obedience, the mind pauses. And in that pause, you must install something deliberate, because the mind cannot operate without a ruling instruction. If you do not consciously replace fear with faith, fear will slowly return, disguised as practicality. Faith is misunderstood. It is not optimism. It is not blind belief. It is not emotional excitement. Faith is disciplined expectation. It is the repeated internal acceptance of a chosen outcome before physical evidence appears. This is where most hesitate, because disciplined expectation feels unnatural at first. You have been trained to believe only what you see. But every achievement begins as an unseen decision. Before Henry Ford produced a single automobile at scale, he accepted internally that it was possible. Before Thomas Edison refined the electric light, he operated under the expectation that a solution existed. That expectation altered their persistence. Faith is not mystical, it is psychological alignment. When you repeatedly impress a definite aim upon your mind with emotion, repetition, and clarity, your subconscious begins organizing behavior around it. This is autosuggestion in its intentional form, not the accidental conditioning that reinforced fear, the deliberate conditioning that reinforces purpose. But here is the difficulty. Your old identity will resist. You may declare a bold direction. You may write it clearly. You may even feel temporary conviction, and then doubt will whisper, "Who are you to expect that? What if this is unrealistic? Is this arrogance?" This is the echo of your former self, the drifting identity fighting for survival, because identity does not dissolve quietly. It demands evidence before surrender, and evidence appears only after sustained action. So there is a gap, a dangerous gap, between declaration and visible result. Most people retreat in that gap. They interpret temporary difficulty as proof they were wrong. But difficulty is neutral. It tests hierarchy. If faith outranks fear, difficulty strengthens resolve. If fear outranks faith, difficulty triggers withdrawal. This is why discipline is not optional. Without daily reinforcement of your chosen direction, your mind reverts to its former programming. You must rehearse your purpose, not casually, with emotional intensity. You must visualize its completion. You must speak it internally. You must remind yourself that identity is self-assigned. At first, this feels forced, because you are interrupting years of unconscious conditioning. But repetition reshapes belief, and belief reshapes action. Faith is constructed, not granted. When you wake each morning and revisit your definite aim, you are not motivating yourself. You are instructing your subconscious. You are telling it, "This is who we are becoming." Over time, your behavior aligns automatically. You begin rejecting opportunities that do not serve your direction. You begin accepting discomfort as necessary. You begin tolerating criticism without collapse, because your internal authority has shifted. Fear no longer dictates terms. Faith commands behavior. But understand something critical. Faith without action becomes delusion. Action without faith becomes exhaustion. The two must operate together. Daily movement toward your defined aim reinforces belief. Reinforced belief strengthens persistence. Persistence produces evidence. Evidence solidifies identity, and identity sustains direction. This is the cycle that replaces drift. There is another element, association. If you remain surrounded by those who operate from fear, your faith will be challenged constantly, not because they intend harm, but because your transformation disrupts their equilibrium. When you begin acting decisively, you expose their hesitation, and exposure creates discomfort. Some will discourage you subtly, others will question your realism. This is where the mastermind principle becomes essential. You must associate with individuals who respect direction, who understand commitment, who value growth over comfort, not to borrow their confidence, but to reinforce your own. Environment either nourishes faith or corrodes it. There is no neutrality. You cannot cultivate a bold identity in a climate of chronic doubt. You must choose your influences deliberately, just as you choose your aim deliberately. This is the replacement. Fear once ruled automatically. Now faith must be maintained intentionally. And over time, something extraordinary happens. The actions that once felt unnatural become standard. The risks that once seemed terrifying become strategic. The criticism that once paralyzed becomes irrelevant, because your identity has shifted from reactive to directive. You are no longer asking permission from circumstance. You are issuing instruction to yourself. This is quiet power, not loud, not boastful, invisible to most, but internally unshakable. Yet even here, there is a final refinement required. Because direction without humility becomes rigidity, and faith without awareness becomes blindness. The last stage is not about proving yourself, it is about stabilizing your authority, about living with such clarity that drift no longer tempts you, and that requires something deeper still. There is a version of you that no longer negotiates with uncertainty. Not because uncertainty vanished, but because your relationship with it changed. You stopped asking, "Will this work?" and started asking, "Is this aligned?" That shift is subtle, but it separates those who drift from those who direct. When your life is organized around a definite purpose, events lose their power to destabilize you. Delays are no longer insults. Obstacles are no longer personal attacks. They are feedback, information, adjustment points. Your emotional volatility decreases because your identity is no longer dependent on immediate outcomes. This is quiet power. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It does not require applause. It moves with certainty because certainty was constructed deliberately. Most people never experience this. They live in reaction cycles. Good news lifts them. Bad news collapses them. Opinion shapes them. Comparison disturbs them. But when faith has replaced fear as the governing force, you are no longer pulled in every direction. You have a center. That center is chosen. And because it is chosen, it is stable. You no longer measure your progress against others. You measure it against your declared aim. You no longer seek approval before action. You act, then allow reaction to follow. You no longer postpone bold moves waiting for confidence. Confidence now trails discipline, and discipline has become routine. This is not dramatic transformation. It is structural transformation. Your thinking changes first, then your language, then your habits, then your results. And eventually, without announcement, your identity solidifies into something new. You are no longer the person who might. You are the person who does. Notice what has disappeared. Excuses, long explanations, chronic hesitation. You do not defend your direction. You simply move. And because you move consistently, others begin to interpret your consistency as talent. But it is not talent. It is non-drifting. It is the refusal to surrender decision-making authority to fear. There is a composure that emerges when you know your days are not accidental, when you wake with instruction already installed, when your actions are extensions of a declared purpose. Time feels different. It is no longer something you spend. It is something you allocate. There is no panic about wasted years, because each day is aligned, even if progress is slow. Even if results are delayed, alignment replaces anxiety. You begin to understand something that once felt abstract. Freedom is not the absence of responsibility. It is the mastery of it. Most people avoid responsibility because it feels heavy, but unclaimed responsibility creates helplessness. Claimed responsibility creates control. You no longer blame conditions. You adjust strategy. You no longer resent criticism. You filter it. You no longer fear failure. You interpret it. And in doing so, you remove the emotional turbulence that once controlled you. This is what very few achieve, not because it is inaccessible, but because it requires sustained internal command. You cannot drift into quiet power. You must build it, day by day, decision by decision, thought by thought. There will still be moments of doubt. Moments where fear attempts to reassert influence, but it no longer dominates. It is noticed, examined, dismissed, because you recognize it as a former ruler, not a present authority. Your life becomes simpler, not easier, simpler, clear aim, consistent action, measured adjustment, no unnecessary drama, no exaggerated identity, just direction. And here is the final truth few are willing to face. Most lives end without conscious direction, because most people never decide who they are willing to become. They hope to discover it. They wait to feel it. They assume clarity will arrive uninvited. But clarity is constructed. Identity is declared. Direction is chosen. If you do not choose, something else will. If you do not define yourself, environment will. If you do not discipline your thoughts, fear will. You now understand the mechanism. Drift is passive. Direction is intentional. Fear is automatic. Faith is constructed. Effort is common. Alignment is rare. The difference between an ordinary life and an extraordinary one is not intelligence. It is not background. It is not opportunity. It is the moment a person accepts full authority over internal command and never relinquishes it again. You will not feel fireworks. You will not receive immediate confirmation, but you will feel something deeper, a quiet steadiness, a reduction in internal conflict, a sense that your future is no longer accidental. That is the shift. That is the transformation. That is the difference between moving and arriving. Now, the only question that remains is one you must answer privately. Will you live by default or by design?